The tendency with the anxious style is to want to I want them to like me. I want them to like me before really assessing, do I really want to be in relationship with this person? Do I know this person? So the tendency is to go in fast and go in hot. So my top tip is really slow down.
This is episode number 605. We just reached our 600th episode a little while ago, which is so exciting. And I am very excited to bring you Jennifer Nurick. She is going to be talking about healing your anxious attachment. It's a conversation that I love having. And she wrote a book about this. So we're going to get started with Jennifer in just a minute. But before that, I wanted to welcome you back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you, I've written 2 books. The first one is called Becoming a Woman of Value: How to Thrive in Life and Love. And this book is filled with 30 chapters that will help you to really build your core confidence so that you can show up fully in your life authentically and really thrive. And each chapter has an exercise. The chapters are divided into show up, stand up, and speak up sections. And the second book is called Choice Points in Dating. And this is a book, really a handbook for your dating life, from all the choices we make along the way, from how to think about dating, to the mindset we have, to how to choose a partner with clarity and not just dating in the dark, which is what I did for most of my life before I knew how to date in a way that was successful, and how to date online, offline, all the parts of dating, when to go, when to stay, and how to go on your last first date. So they're both available on Amazon for Kindle and paperback, and the Choice Points book is now available on Audible. And my tip this week from the Woman of Value book is to be firm about your standards. I love talking about boundaries and standards, because when we know how we want to be treated in dating and relationships, we can then speak up and set boundaries around the things that are important to us. We don't have to feel like a victim of our lives. So my challenge to you this week is, if there's an area of your life where you're feeling blindsided, victimized, taken advantage of, whatever it is, just take a moment to think about it and think about what values of yours are being stepped on in the process, and then take a stand for those values. Speak up. It may not come out exactly right the first few times, because it does take time, but it's better to say something than to stay quiet and feel disempowered in your life. Before I bring Jennifer on, I just want to give a quick shout out to my Facebook group, Your Last First Date. It is a safe space for women who are over 40 and dating, or in relationships. Most groups out there are filled with people who say men are terrible and dating's awful, and everybody's just there to go, yes, I feel that way too. Or, have you dated this man? He's horrible. We don't do any of those things. We are really a positive place of support with a lot of education. And I have 7 incredible moderators who help me run this group. And so come and join us there at Your Last First Date. And now for my guest, Jennifer Nurick. She specializes in healing anxious attachment injuries, and childhood trauma. She's a licensed clinical psychotherapist, a counselor, an energetic healer, and the author of a new book called Heal Your Anxious Attachment: Release Past Trauma, Cultivate Secure Relationships, and Nurture a Deeper Sense of Self. She's the founder and voice of Psychotherapy Central, and she's been working in the healing space for over 20 years, combining Eastern energetic practices and Western psychotherapy. She offers transformational courses to help people and couples heal trauma and build secure long-term relationships. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Let us talk about attachment styles. We love this topic here, and I would love to hear what they are.
So there are 2 main categories of attachment style. We have secure and we have insecure. And about 50% of the population falls into the secure bracket, and then 50% insecure. And then in the insecure segment, we have anxious, and we have avoidant, and then disorganized. And disorganized is quite a small sliver. And then the other 2 are sort of split evenly. So there's a lot of, so my system is more of the anxious, it's the spectrum. When we say I'm more anxiously attached, it could be extreme on that spectrum, or it could be closer to secure. So it's not kind of a diagnosis. It's not something that's like an illness. It's just kind of, this is how I show up in the interpersonal space with my person. So attachment styles can show up at work, can show up in friendships, but the place where they'll be the most raw, the most kind of ouch, that really hurts, is when we're forming that a secure relationship with our person. And that takes about 2 years. We know from the research that's usually about a 2-year process to form secure attachment.
Going from an insecure attachment to a secure attachment within your romantic relationships takes about 2 years.
To change it, but also if you're in relationship, it takes 2 years to transition from the support of people around, so family and friends, which obviously we want to keep. We don't want to, but they've shown through the research that that as you move into relationship, and it generally takes about 2 years, whereas before you might have gone to this friend for that or dad for that, the tendency is I go to the partner for that. When I'm feeling unsafe, I go to my partner. When I'm feeling anxious, I go to my partner. When I'm feeling, so to make that transition.
Okay. If you can go into a little bit more depth about the anxious, the avoidant, and the disorganized, please.
Let's start with the disorganized. So when we have a disorganized attachment, it comes from a place of, I like to imagine a child kind of, I'm reaching out and I have a need that wants to be met. Maybe it's I'm hungry or I've hurt myself, but I'm reaching out to my caregivers. And I like to broaden it past just the mother, whoever is the primary caregiver. I'm kind of reaching out. And sometimes that person, I get my needs met and is safe, but sometimes it is terrifying and dangerous. And so there is this biological imperative to be connected, because as humans, if up to about maybe 10 years old, if we're not connected to an adult, we're going to die. So there is this imperative to be connected to our caregivers. But if the caregivers are also a source of pain and hurt, then there's also this equal and opposite pull to get away, get away. So we've got this kind of, I have to attach, I have to get away. I have to attach, I have to get away. And we know again through the research that that carries on into adulthood, this same kind of pattern. And so for both people in that relationship, it can feel very intense. And there can be a lot of intense pulling towards and then intense pulling away. And there's usually trauma history with that attachment style. And so one of the tips is, if you can, go and see a trauma therapist and start working through the trauma history, because it will reduce the intensity of the pull to and the pull away over time. And it's not a magic Kool-Aid. It's a process, but absolutely durable. I've seen it happen over and over again. Okay, so avoidance. There we have reaching out for connection, and let's just say maybe the caregiver is working a lot, not really present. Maybe they have some mental health stuff going on and not able to meet the child. Maybe the child is told off for reaching out, told they shouldn't, go away, whatever's going on. But it's just that when the child reaches out, they're not met enough. And so as parents, sometimes parents hear this and start to worry, oh, I'm not always there. Sometimes I'm busy doing the washing up. Sometimes I'm busy doing the laundry. Of course, of course. And so it's always enough, just being there and meeting the other enough. So when it doesn't happen enough in the avoidance system, and again, it's not conscious, there is this, well, there's no point. There's no point in me reaching out. So I'll take care of myself. I'll get my own cereal. I'll do my own, whatever it is I need to do. And in fact, sometimes it can go so deep as there's no point in me having a need. There's no point in me connecting with what I'm feeling in my body, because it has no impact on the people around me. So what's the point? So therapeutically, often those systems have quite big blocking parts and numbing parts that will come over to hide that whatever the feeling is, I have a need for something, and the blocking parts will come over. Okay, the anxious style, when the need isn't met enough, the anxious style will start to follow the caregiver. So I have to stay close because, again, sometimes my needs are met and sometimes they're not, and I can't really tell when it's going to happen. And so I've got to stay close to that person. Sometimes it can be environmentally. There could be something that's not safe in the environment. So if I stay really close to that person, I'm safe. Sometimes it can be that the adult has had a big loss. Maybe they've lost their partner and they're really concerned about the child. And so the child is learning, I'm not safe, something's not right with me. And so I have to stay close to caregiver. And again, that transfers over. So in adulthood, that looks like being very sensitive to relational distance. And it can be quite subtle things. You know, I was saying something, and as I was saying it, and to me it was quite emotionally intense, he looked away. And I felt this pang of he doesn't care, he's not listening, he doesn't care about me. And it can even go into he's thinking about leaving the relationship, he's not engaged anymore. And then behaviors can come up to try and keep them engaged in the relationship, which can be different kinds of different behaviors. And so that's the relationship dynamic that I have with my husband of 18 years. I'm more on the anxious end of the scale, and he has more of an avoidance system naturally. And so we tend to go into, if anyone knows Sue Johnson's work, emotionally focused couples therapy, she talks a lot about, she calls it pursuer withdrawer, which is I think she felt that it was a softer name than kind of anxious, because a lot of anxious style people don't like to be called anxious. They can feel like, I'm not anxious. You know, I can be very assertive, but sometimes that assertion in the anxious style isn't skillful assertion. It comes out more of a protest and can sound quite angry. But when we look at it through an attachment lens, it's always a call for connection.
Having an anxious and an avoidant together, it's a very common dynamic. They're very drawn to each other, right? In partnership, there's that push and pull. You know, the person, the way I like to think about it is the anxious gets very kind of clingy when the avoidant starts to feel pushed away. And then the anxious may shut down, and then the avoidant might come closer. And so we have that constant pushing and pulling. And it's really important to learn how to work on these protest behaviors, like you call them, and learn how to navigate our differences and our different ways of finding connection. So what are some of the strategies that you've learned in your relationship?
It was a big moment for me when I really understood that when my partner pulls away, it's not personal to me, and that he is still very much that the kinds of things that are going on inside of withdrawing partners is things like I'm not good enough again. You know, I'm never going to be enough. They hear often complaints, and that's quite common that the anxious party will offer up complaints about different things because we're very hyper attuned to the withdrawal. And so what might be a withdrawal when we feel more anxious wouldn't be a withdrawal to somebody who is more secure. So there's a sensitivity to it. So that for me was huge when I really understood that what was going on internally for him was not personal to me. It was, I think of it as scared parts, actually, that his sort of scared parts, his parts that were feeling really overwhelmed, there often can be like a big overwhelmed feeling. When he feels like that, he needs to withdraw so that he can feel safer in himself. Whereas my impulse is to do the opposite. My impulse is to step forward and, well, let's talk about it and let's connect. And his impulse is, oh, this is getting more and more temperature in it. And so I want to step back because I want to protect the relationship. And I go, I want to step forward because I want to protect the relationship. So our aim is the same, but our strategy is different. And that for me was really helpful to
Yeah.
understand.
No, that is helpful. And I like the way you put it. I think we all have these inner dialogues that say, this must mean this, right? And
Mm,
when we attach meaning to anything and we're just making up a story, and right. So I think one of the helpful things that I found is also just speaking that story out loud. You know, the story I'm making up when you do this is that you don't care about me. And not to say that all the time, because you can be very clingy and expect the other person to constantly reassure you, and that can be not so healthy for the relationship. I had a client, she had a very anxious attachment style. He had a more secure attachment style, I'd say. At the beginning of the relationship, she said, this is what happens to me. If I don't hear from you when you say you're going to call, I'm going to make up a story that you don't care about me. So it's really important to me that you follow through. And he said, whatever you need from me. And there were times when he was so tired that he committed to calling and then fell asleep, and she spiraled out of control. She learned to talk it out and to say, you know, what happened, instead of going into that space of he's breaking up with me, seeing somebody else, there's something else going on.
mm,
And
mm,
so if somebody's dating, and especially at the
mm,
beginning of dating, and they have an anxious attachment style, what would you recommend? Well, first of all, how would it show up? You know, I gave you one example, but how else would it
mm.
show up in dating?
I think dating is so tough because there's already a distance. And we're doing that beautiful dance of assessment. You know, can we fit? Can we work with each other? The tendency with the anxious style is to want to I want them to like me. I want them to like me before really assessing, do I really want to be in relationship with this person? Do I know this person? So the tendency is to go in fast and go in hot. So my top tip is really slow down and flip it into, rather than I'm in kind of I want to be accepted and worthy in this relationship, flipping it into I'm going to move forward really curiously and get to know the different aspects of this person. And one of my own things that I was always really hot on with dating, I mean, this is way back in my my mid-20s now, early 20s, was how do they react under pressure? And I remember when my husband, we were in India, we were in a post office, it was boiling hot, we'd just gone through this thing. And I remember something happening that later on I thought, geez, that was quite a strong reaction. But I had this feeling that he'd seen the worst of me now. And so if we were going to be together, if he loved me seeing and knowing that, then we're good. So I think there's something about knowing people well enough to see them under pressure. That might not happen for a year or so because often in the beginning we've got the rose-colored glasses on. Yeah. So going in slowly with dating, sense of you being really curious about them and taking time to get to know if they're a good fit for you. If they say they don't want a long-term relationship, believe them, because sometimes we can think, they said that, but maybe they'll change their mind and then get really hurt. Notice how you feel around them is another tip. And it can be helpful to think about, how do I feel around the friends who I feel the most comfortable and most at ease with, and use that as a gauge. How do I feel around this person? Because sometimes our inner knowing, the more subtle signs can let us know that they're subtle. And I have a lot of people with anxious attachment say, but Jen, how do you know when it's the attachment, and how do you know when it's more your intuition? I
Yeah,
think that
that's a
that's,
big distinction for people, and
yeah,
confusing. Or how do I know when to give someone the benefit of the doubt? Or am I being too harsh? Especially the avoidants are quick to run away from anything that feels a little off. And so
yeah.
are they running away too soon? You know, these things really affect our dating lives in ways that people have no clue. But I like a lot of what you shared. I think we tend to, especially if we have an anxious attachment style, to be thinking so much more about whether they like us and not whether we like them. And so I think that distinction right away is checking in with your body, checking in with your heart rate, checking in, do you feel safe? A lot of times people feel really good when they're with someone, but not when they're not with them. And I always say it should be both. Like you need to feel that you are secure apart and together, not just when you're
Mm.
together. I mean, I've dated people who, when we're together, it's amazing, and then I don't hear from them for a week. I can't handle that. That does not
Mm.
work for me in my life. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'll say something. You know, I would speak up and say, I need more communication. Otherwise, it's really hard to sustain this relationship. And is that something you can do? And if it's not, then have a nice life, you know, like,
Mm.
but the old me just lived in fantasy. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. Have you seen relationships work where only one person is working on themselves?
It depends on how extreme the patterns are. Usually find that there is a unresolved trauma component as well, because remember that attachment styles are coming out of an imprint that we've learned, and we're looking at kind of rewiring that imprint. I find that couples therapy can be very helpful, especially emotionally focused couples therapy, which is based on attachment. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, my husband and I totally have that pattern, what could I do? My husband won't go to therapy. There's no way. Sometimes they might not go to therapy on their own, but they'll go to therapy for the relationship. I mean, look, if they're sitting in therapy with their arms crossed and not saying anything, of course, but you have to engage in the process. But I have seen really beautiful, really amazing repair work happen, even in long-term marriages where patterns are deeply ingrained and where there's real hurt and wounding through the relationship. I've seen really amazing things happen where there is a lot of softening on both sides, because we often get into these kind of staunch positions. You know, my staunch position, I have my shield and my sword, and you're not coming in, and I have my I have my fiery sword to keep. And it's kind of, we get into these entrenched dynamics, so there is a softening that can happen through a process like that, and you know, and it's not a forever process with EFT. It's sort of 12 to 20 sessions, and sometimes longer depending on what's going on with the couple. But I've seen amazing change and softening in the relationship and reconnection happening in 12 to 20 sessions. So yeah, couple work would be my big tip. Can it work? Of course. If your partner's doing no work and thinks that there's nothing wrong with them and will not come to couple therapy, that's really tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be able and willing to admit that you're part of the problem. Let's talk about breaking some unhealthy attachment patterns. You brought up a couple things and some strategies that you've used and some ways at the beginning of dating that we can look at the other partner, look at ourselves and how we're approaching the relationship. What are some other tips that you have for breaking these unhealthy patterns that we have?
So when I started to think about writing the book, it was because I had so many people coming to me saying, Jen, I'm really anxious in relationships. Is there a great kind of how-to book? And I bought a bunch of books, and I found that a lot of them at that time, um, 9 chapters would describe attachment, what it is, go into a lot of depth about the problem. And then the chapter at the end would be a very skinny chapter about how to fix it. And mostly it basically said, go and see a therapist. And I thought about that and I thought, you know, like I've worked through this, and I help lots of my clients work with this. So there are absolutely things that people can do. And I thought, let's just write a book and put it down. So in my book, it's kind of the first skinny chapter is about what are the attachment styles. And the rest of the book is all about things that I can do, strategies to work with it. So I've separated out into two parts. One is how do I form internal secure attachment? So all those parts of me that are looking for the other for reassurance, I mean, in some ways for redemption, because it's kind of like if I can make my partner love me and see me in the way that I wasn't seen and loved back then I am lovable and I am worthy. So I like to think of it sometimes as we have parts of us unknowingly that are still looking to repair what happened in childhood and acting it out through the relationship. So part of what we can do is to help those younger parts of us form that secure inner attachment. And that's what I call it, a secure inner attachment. The first part of the book is all about how to do that. So there's 20 practices that come with the book. I love how you said in your book you have each chapter has an exercise because relational work is it's not cognitive. Like if it was, I can say this script and everything will be completely different, but it's so behavior absolutely is part of it. But in those moments where we feel the panic inside the body, we can't just make that go away with our thoughts. So we can rationalize and, maybe there's other options. Maybe it's not that he's leaving me. Maybe it's he's busy at work and maybe there's other things. So how do I work with that panic in my body? So there's a whole segment around somatic reconnecting in with the felt sensations of the body, which is super helpful with the anxious style of, how we were talking about the intuition and recognizing it. There's a section around our secure thinking versus anxious thinking. So that's more of a top-down piece. And there's a whole piece around reparenting, which is forming part of that inner secure attachment, valuing yourself and forming that deeper sense of self as a platform to creating that secure relationship. You don't have to not be in relationship while you're doing this. You can absolutely be in relationship of 20 years and start doing this. Never too late. And the second part of the book is more about communication and boundaries. We talk about co-regulation and polyvagal theory. What are the things that soothe me? How can I learn to recognize those and use those in moments of stress and moments of calm? So there's heaps in there. It really traverses, polyvagal theory, somatics, reparenting. But they're practices to do over and over again. There's a whole segment on triggering. So when I'm triggered in relationship, what is a step-by-step process that I can do to hold myself through that? And how can I call them triggers as treasures. How can I use that trigger as a treasure, as a pathway into some of my own healing work?
Yeah, there's a lot there.
There's heaps.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but it's all so valuable. And it's so much of what I've discovered as I went further into my coaching career that these parts are all really essential. Like if somebody would come to me and say, my biggest problem is there are no good men in my small town. That's my biggest problem. And I'm like, well, let's discover if that's really your biggest problem or not. And it's never the biggest problem because, other people who say I'm not attracted to anyone, and it's not because you're asexual or you have an attraction issue. It's usually something deeper that comes from childhood. And once you recognize why we get triggered, what the triggers are, we can name them, we can be aware, we can be less reactive, we can be in charge of our emotions instead of letting other people affect us as deeply as they might have in the past. And so forming that deeper sense of self, it takes work, and learning how to self-regulate is the first step to co-regulation. Even coming home from work, and one exercise I remember hearing about, that if you're in partnership and you're both coming from your lives and coming together, to just breathe together to co-regulate your breath. It's a simple thing, but that moment of co-regulation can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And another one that I love is a welcome hug where you can hold each other and making it a sort of a pattern of kind of holding each other. And then, how was your day? Was tough, was busy. Kids were so full on today. I've got a sore neck. And then your partner puts their hand on your neck. How was
Mm.
your day? And they say, oh, busy. My boss is needing a lot of stuff. I feel a bit headachy. And maybe I put my hand on my partner's forehead. We both exhale. That's a
Mm.
beautiful practice too.
Yeah, very beautiful. It's just attending to each other. We have so little attention these days on anything but our devices. And if people could be more attentive, it would make a world of difference. I have a question. It's actually a little bit of a different topic, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, the difference between validation and connection, a true connection and love, like people who seek validation in relationships versus a true connection.
Are you using the term validation to kind of mean you're allowed to feel what you're feeling, or you're meaning it more like I need to feel worthy, and so I need to be in this relationship to be validated and feel worthy? Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, that's what I'm meaning. Like you are going to validate me. You're going to make me feel attractive and beautiful and smart because I'm with you and you're a person who has some status. And so I feel
Mm,
good being with you that you chose me versus I'm
mm,
in this relationship for true connection. And I want to see if this is a good partnership where we both add to each other's lives and not that just you're feeding my ego, basically. that's
yeah,
that's a
yeah,
lot of the distinction that I see. People get into relationship for validation a lot of times, and it's a very empty kind of place to be because it doesn't
yeah.
sustain. So I'm just curious what your take is on that and where it might fall on the attachment spectrum.
That would be something that I would imagine would show up more with one of the insecure styles because the history with connection has been so fraught. When connection has historically been inconsistent, then true connection can be terrifying. And so I'll go for something that kind of ticks all the social boxes that makes another part of me feel good. And it depends also, if we have a parent who's really valued how we look and how we appear to society, that can also play a big role. Even if that parent has passed away, it can still linger. I need to be showing up with the right car and the right hairstyle and presenting in a certain way, and that stuff can take a while to shift.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
so
sure.
I would say it four would be more in the insecure bracket. I would think that any of the insecure styles that could happen.
Hmm. Yeah.
What's your experience with that?
Definitely have seen people who jump from relationship to relationship and don't understand why they're not working when they come in for validation rather than the clarity of knowing who am I, what do I need, is this working for me? Are we both contributing to each other's lives? Is this a healthy relationship for both of us? That's what
Mm.
I've experienced. And last night I went to a story event through the Moth storytelling platform in New York City. And one of the storytellers was talking about her childhood. This was all about this insecure attachment. And I just, as you're talking, I'm thinking of her story. And she started out talking about how she's always been obsessed with men, even at a young age. It was not boys, it was men, starting with her father. And she describes her life as one of 11 children and the daughter of an alcoholic father who was also a workaholic. And she was starving for his attention. And so she wanted to be the chosen one. And she would wait for him to come home from work, and she would stand by the door and he'd basically walk over her. And then she would sit with him while he had his cocktail, and he would let her sit there if she didn't talk. And then he would let her sit next to him in his workspace with his next cocktail after dinner, and as long as she didn't talk. And it was like a privilege for her to be there, right? And I see you touching your heart. It was so heartfelt because of course this showed up in the patterns of all of her relationships and her husbands who didn't pay attention to her, and that starving for those crumbs of attention. And I think this is such a common thing, maybe not to that extreme, but it's so common for people to settle for those little bits of attention because they didn't get it growing up and they wanted to be chosen so badly. And so I've told people, like, once you realize you're dating your father, your mother, your brother, whoever it is that did this to you and did not give you what you needed, you can stop banging your head against a wall and start getting the help you need, because it's crazy making this cycle of dating people with different faces who all replicate that relationship dynamic until you start to heal within. And so this work is so important, no matter what your attachment style is. And I mean, people say the golden ticket is the secure attachment, and we should all be working towards secure attachment. What do you feel about that?
Generally, the more secure we are in our attachment style, the more comfortable we're going to feel in that intimate relationship. So, but can we be in a happy relationship and always be floating on one side of the spectrum a little bit? Of course. We can still have a very happy, connected relationship. And I think we'll always, sometimes under stress, flip into one or the other. We'll have a default because it's our default, our
Mm,
protective system. And it's just having compassion when we feel ourselves do it, compassion when we feel our partner do it, talk about what happened. Oh, I noticed that we did that thing that we do. Um, yeah. So is it the golden ticket? Yeah, being as close as we can is helpful for sure. And I just want to go back to what you were saying with that example. My heart ached as you spoke about it. I could see that little girl in that office. Yeah, that those patterns absolutely come into our relationship, and we can absolutely end up, even when they don't appear to look like our father, you might find out 4 years later, oh my goodness, they are my father. And totally
mhm.
didn't see it when I was dating. I hear that a lot.
Yes.
Kind of they turn into the person. And the healing, the most potent healing work I've seen around that is using things like internal family systems, where we're working with those parts that are sort of trapped in time and space, and to work with what's showing up in the present day as well. What I see a lot in trauma therapy is that there really are parts of us that are still sitting in that room watching dad with what they drink his cocktail with that longing in the heart. And when those parts can be kind of reintegrated back into present day and the energy of that can be released, it shifts things big time in the system.
Mm,
And then suddenly the person has that sense of, okay, I actually don't need to stay in this relationship anymore. Maybe they'll leave the relationship, or they'll really challenge their partner and say, actually, this isn't okay for me anymore. We need to go and do some couple work. The sense of agency starts to change.
yeah. And sometimes your partner is willing and sometimes not.
Can't control that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
I've seen people approaching dating with a lot of joy and a lot of spaciousness around it. Someone actually a friend of mine who is dating just said, Jen, I'm just going out to meet people and just to meet people. She was seeing a few people a week. And she said, you've just got to meet a lot of people and not take it personally. Just meet up. If there's a connection, meet again. And if they don't want to see you, don't take it personally. And if I don't, and if I don't feel it with them, being okay to just say, yep, not feeling it and move on until I do. And yeah, she has been on her last first date, and I feel like it was her going in with that attitude. There was a lightness and a joy and a sense of curiosity. I'm just going to meet people and explore. And she went on a lot of dates, a lot of dates, but had that approach the whole way through. So I think that would actually be my biggest tip around dating.
I
And
love
slow
that.
down if you have the
Yeah.
anxious start. Like I said,
It's
slow down.
definitely slow down. And somebody who's not willing to slow down with you is not the right person. If they're in a big
Mm.
hurry and want to push you to sleep with them early on or commit to them early on, and you are needing space, then they're not respecting your needs and it's time to move on. But I love the spaciousness that you described. I totally agree with that. I think that when you hold dating so tightly and with that hope that each person is going to be the one, you're constantly disappointed because most people will not be the one for you. And that's okay, because dating is a lot of no's until you get your
Mm.
yes. And then there could be another
Yeah.
yes, right? There could be many yeses. And so I think this is a beautiful way to end this conversation. And I know that you have a free training. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
It's really a free training around noticing cycles in your relationship, noticing cycles that are showing up in your life. Could be repeating cycles with family, with friends.
The link for this will be in the show notes. Tell us your link to your website.
Psychotherapycentral.health.
Well, thank you so much, Jen, for getting up early. It's 7 a.m. in Australia, and for this beautiful conversation full of compassion and hope for people to grow into the best version of themselves, and to really to know that the help is out there, that you don't have to live with whatever your childhood upbringing was that influenced your romantic relationships today, that you can have healthier relationships, that you can get the help you need. And your book has a lot in there that people can benefit from.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I also really enjoyed it. And yeah, just much love to all the listeners.
And thanks everybody for listening. As always, if you love our show, please share it with your friends, let people know, follow the show, give us a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.